The growth numbers have come in higher than many expected, but I'm still not satisfied with the level of growth that our economy is achieving, and that's why I am determined to go further and faster.
For at the moment, we'll come on to some of these issues.
Well, some of the things,
in a minute.
Andrew, we're actually going to go further than the government. So, for example, cutting benefits for young people who don't sign up for training. The government haven't introduced that. For example, saying that the richest pensioners shouldn't get winter fuel allowance. That's something that the government haven't signed up to. So those are two cuts that you get under Labour that this government haven't signed up for. 100 million on the winter fuel allowance, 65 million pounds on the on youth allowance.
Rachel Reeves claimed she worked at the Bank of England for 10 years. Sounds impressive, right? Well, there's just one problem. It's not true. Official records show she was there from September 2000 to March 2006, which is 5.5 years, not 10. Now, maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe she simply forgot the exact dates. But here's where things start to look suspicious. Her LinkedIn profile originally stated she left in December 2006, 9 months later than the actual date, and when she was called out on it, her team blamed it on an administrative oversight. It might seem like a small error, but when you're presenting yourself as an economic expert, shouldn't you at least get your own work history right? British politics like this one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Dark British. Believe it or not, over 98% of viewers watch our content without hitting the follow button. Subscribing is completely free.
That she pretended she was an economist at HBOS when she was no such thing. She was a manager in charge of complaints or something. We know now that her claim to have been an economist for 10 years at the Bank of England was a crock of crap. She was actually an economist for 5 years and 9 months. She said, all right, it wasn't 10 years, it was 6 years. Well, it wasn't 6 years either. So she had to admit again that she was wrong. And then her people in her communications department said that this mistake was due to an administrative error. It wasn't. It was due to another lie.
Then there's Halifax Bank of Scotland, another position Rachel Reeves often highlights in her career. She described herself as an economist there, which sounds impressive, like she was making major financial decisions and shaping strategies. But the reality appears quite different. Reports suggest her role wasn't focused on high-level economic planning at all. Instead, she mainly worked in the complaints department, handling administrative tasks. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's a far cry from the image of an economist influencing financial policy. And that's not the only controversy. There are also claims that during her time at HBO's an internal investigation was launched into her expenses. Reeves insists she had no idea about any such probe, but the fact that this question is even being raised doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
So the economic figures today show we're all getting poorer again, and we're led by the most incompetent Chancellor in history, Rachel Reeves, and there are some very big questions. She said she worked for 10 years at the Bank of England, turns out it was 5.5. Said she was an economist at the Bank of England, turns out she was in customer service. And on expenses, well, she had very big problems when she worked for a bank, and as a member of Parliament, had her credit card taken away. So
put it all together and you get a Chancellor who hasn't been entirely truthful about her career. Someone who exaggerates her experience while insisting she's the right person to manage the country's economy. But she's not the only one in Labour raising eyebrows. Soon we'll get into how even her own colleagues don't fully trust the team that's supposed to be running the country. And then there's Andrew Neil, a journalist who never goes easy on politicians. He asks the kind of tough questions that make them squirm, and Rachel Reeves has found herself in his sights more than once.
When she was at HBOS, 2006 to 2009, where, as I say, she says she was an economist, but she wasn't. She was a sort of complaints manager or something. Anyway, the allegation is she left under a cloud amid a big investigation into her and 2 other managers funding what was called a lifestyle, a luxury lifestyle, on the back of their company expense accounts, buying gifts for each other, wine, jewellery, dinners, taxis, you name it. And the word was that she had to quit over this investigation.
A few years ago, Andrew Neil pressed Rachel Reeves on her position regarding the winter fuel allowance, a vital benefit that helps pensioners keep their homes warm during the cold winter months. At the time, she dodged the question, trying to downplay the issue, but the truth was obvious. She wanted to cut it. Fast forward to her time as Chancellor, and what happened? Exactly what many had feared. She scrapped it, the very thing she had been reluctant to admit in that interview became official policy under her leadership. But Neil didn't stop there. More recently, he's been digging even deeper into her economic credentials. Given her history of stretching the truth, It's no surprise he's questioning the legitimacy of her achievements. She presents herself as a finance and economics expert, yet she's been caught exaggerating her work history and spinning weak economic growth as if it were some kind of grand success.
So we can now pretty much consign everything Labour had to say about tax during the election campaign to the dustbin of history. Consider how the narrative has changed. Before the election, we were assured that all Labour spending plans were fully costed and that there was no need for taxes to rise, bar a few small and specific increases like VAT on school fees. Within weeks of being elected, Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed to have discovered a £22 billion fiscal black hole left behind by the dastardly Tory. PR and the IFS had already warned that Labour would inherit an eye-wateringly tight fiscal position, but that didn't stop Reeves affecting to be surprised.
Neil has been relentless in exposing the gaps in her resume and the lack of genuine progress under her leadership. His message is clear. If she can't be truthful about her own past, how can she be trusted with the nation's financial future? And he's not the only one raising concerns. Even within her own party, serious doubts are growing about the path Britain is taking under its current leadership. When members of your own team begin to lose faith in you, that's when things truly start to fall apart.
He said she's had 5 years to prepare for being Chancellor, and she's actually screwed it all up in her first budget. And what
he's angry with her for not abolishing air passenger
What
duty.
scares me about her is she sees what's happening. She sees what her policies have done so far, and she's not admitting it. She's been told by business leaders that the rumours are there's like 150,000 job losses so far, but she's been told by businesses that they are being crippled by the NI rise. She's not listening. She's just saying it'll work eventually. She doesn't look at the mistakes. She needs to just say, OK, that was wrong.
Rachel Reeves stood before the cameras, grinning as she proudly announced a 0.1% increase in the UK's GDP for the last quarter of 2024. Yes, 0.1%, a number so small you'd need a microscope to notice it. Yet she spoke as if she had rescued the economy from the brink of collapse. Here's the reality. That tiny growth figure barely keeps the country out of recession. It's not a sign of a booming economy, it's a sign of stagnation. The economy has been flatlining for months, and this 0.1% rise is nothing more than a dead cat bouncing, insignificant uptick that changes nothing for ordinary people. Still, Reeves acted as though she had delivered an economic miracle. The truth, wages are still struggling to keep up with inflation. Businesses are facing harsher conditions, and the cost of living crisis is far from over. But hey, 0.1%. Right.
We don't seek to embarrass you, but we'd just quickly like to go through it. It'll take me 20 seconds to summarise it. You told Stylist magazine that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade. In fact, it was only 6 years. And one of those years was at the London School of Economics doing a master's course. So that's 5 years and not a decade. And in biographies that you'd actually endorsed, it was stated that you worked as an economist at the Bank of England, the British Embassy in Washington, and latterly at the Halifax Bank of Scotland. But according to your former colleagues in your actual job, you actually worked in a support department at Scottish Bank, and you sort of helped out with admin and IT, and that's all earned you the nickname of Rachel from Accounts.
And if that wasn't enough, let's talk about her fiscal policies because they reveal an even bigger problem. Back in October 2024, Rachel Reeves introduced a budget that included a staggering £40 billion in tax hikes, the biggest increase the UK has seen since 1993. The goal: more revenue for the government. The reality: less money in people's pockets, lower business confidence, and a serious threat to economic growth. Raising taxes during a weak economy is like trying to fill a leaky bucket. It just doesn't work. Businesses are already struggling, and higher taxes only make it harder for them to invest, grow, or hire new workers. And when businesses hold back, the economy holds back too, trapping the country in a cycle of slow growth with no real momentum.
I think it's a disastrous budget. I think it'll do the country untold harm. To start off with, we didn't know it was coming, this massive 40 billion quid, because Starmer and Rachel Reeves lied to the electorate. They didn't tell them. In the manifesto, there is no mention whatsoever of half of these increases that they've introduced right out of the blue. If the electorate had known £40 billion worth of new taxes was required, I bet you the election would have been much, much closer.
Even Labour supporters are starting to question Rachel Reeves. She presents herself as an economic expert, but so far, the numbers just don't back up that claim. Instead of making the tough choices needed for genuine growth, she seems more focused on spinning the story, hoping the public won't notice a difference between a real recovery and a statistical rounding error. Meanwhile, business leaders are sounding the alarm, warning that her policies could do more harm than good. When confidence falls, investments disappear, and without investment, the economy stalls. It's a dangerous cycle, and Reeves appears to be the one setting it in motion. So what's her plan now? Will she keep celebrating tiny, mostly meaningless improvements while avoiding the bigger problems? Or will she finally admit that high taxes, weak policies, and an exaggerated reputation aren't the foundation of a strong economy? Because right now, it looks like she's simply buying time, and sooner or later the British public will notice. It's one thing when the opposition questions your leadership, but when your own supporters start speaking up, that's when the trouble really begins.
It is a familiar tune. Every mortgage they raise, every cut they make, every tax they hike, the Conservatives are costing you. And what have we heard today? Yet more excuses and unfair choices. They have failed to tackle the cost of living crisis. They have failed to show how they will fix our public services. They have failed to show how they will deliver growth.
Rachel Reeves has been treading a thin line when it comes to the truth about her career, and her economic track record isn't exactly boosting confidence. Now, even members of her own party are beginning to question the leadership at the top. British public isn't blind to this. When people hear Reeves exaggerate her time at the Bank of England or watch her celebrate a mere 0.1% economic growth as if it's a breakthrough, it sparks real doubt. If politicians can't be truthful about the small things, how can they be trusted with the big ones? Labour promised stability, but instead, there's clear division at the top. Public trust is shaky, and the economy is barely moving forward. If senior Labour figures themselves are losing faith in the party's leadership, why should the rest of the country feel any different?
Did you enhance your CV to make yourself look better qualified to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer if you won the election?
I'm really proud of the jobs that I did before I became a Member of Parliament. I worked at the Bank of England in the international area, working on investment and productivity. I worked as the second Economic Secretary at the British Embassy in Washington. I've done an undergraduate degree in PPE, a master's from the London School of Economics in economics, and then I worked in the private sector where I worked for Halifax Bank of Scotland, working in Halifax in West Yorkshire and around the country, heading up teams both in the mortgages area and in the retail operations.
Why did you say that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade when in fact it was, well, it wasn't even 6 years, it was 5? I mean, that's exaggeration, isn't it?
So, where does that leave us? Rachel Reeves has faced heavy scrutiny for exaggerating her credentials, with Andrew Neil grilling her over the misleading claims she's made. She even hailed weak economic growth as if it was some kind of major victory. But the reality is clear. She's part of a government where even senior Labour figures no longer have full confidence in the leadership. The UK's economy isn't thriving. It's barely staying afloat. Instead of delivering real solutions, the public is being fed PR spin and excuses. The £40 billion tax hike is piling pressure on both businesses and workers, while trust in the government continues to erode. And now, with Labour's own deputy leader openly criticising the Prime Minister, the depth of division and dysfunction within the party is impossible to ignore.
No matter, the search was on for some big tax rises to fill in the black hole. But it didn't stop there, because now the talk is of tax rises and spending cuts totalling £40 billion, with tax rises doing the heavy lifting at £35 billion, it said, out of the 40 billion.
So, where does that leave us? Rachel Reeves has faced heavy scrutiny for exaggerating her credentials, with Andrew Neil grilling her over the misleading claims she's made. She even hailed weak economic growth as if it was some kind of major victory. But the reality is clear. She's part of a government where even senior Labour figures no longer have full confidence in the leadership. The UK's economy isn't thriving. It's barely staying afloat. Instead of delivering real solutions, the public is being fed PR spin and excuses. The £40 billion tax hike is piling pressure on both businesses and workers, while trust in the government continues to erode. And now, with Labour's own deputy leader openly criticising the Prime Minister, the depth of division and dysfunction within the party is impossible to ignore.